Welcome, Gunrunner.
Hello everybody, Kieran aka The Laird here, and I have a hardware review for you this week in my usual schedule of two documentaries followed by a hardware review. And this week I have one that I meant to do absolutely ages ago, but I think I said in one of my previous videos that I couldn't find my 7800, but then I came across it in a box where it really shouldn't have been. So here it is, long overdue. I actually did do a video ages back now, looking at all the different controllers available for the 7800, and that actually was meant to be kind of followed up with the actual review of the system, but I couldn't find the system, which was quite strange. I could find all the controllers but not the system. But as I said, it was in a really strange place, really somewhere it shouldn't have been. But as you can see, this is my PAL 7800. I've got it boxed, although there is a tear in the box. But I'm not too fussed about that. I think there's a tear on the side as well, actually there, part of it's missing. But I got this so cheaply that I'm really not bothered. It's hard to remember because I picked this up years ago. Actually, I think when I came back from Tenerife in 2003, I started collecting again. Probably later that year, but more 2004. And I think that's when I picked this up. Was 2004. So it was one of the very, very, very first systems that I picked up when I started collecting, because I always wanted a 7800 when I was younger. I had a 2600 Junior and I didn't have one. Two of my friends had 7800s called Paul and Will, and I absolutely loved them, loved playing on them. And I loved the fact that obviously you could use 2600 games on them. So I'd always wanted one so I could, use my 2600 games plus all the great 7800 games that were available. So yes, here it is. So let's have a bit more of a look at it. This isn't an unboxing, but I thought it'd be nice to see the box anyway. And let's look on the back. So on the back we've got some screenshots of some of the games there. So Ms. Pac-Man, Karateka, Dig Dug, Xephus, Ball Blazer, Joust, Hat Trick, Desert Falcon, Donkey Kong Jr., Pole Position 2, Crossbow Fight Night. And in different European languages. Obviously the American box will be completely different. There's some more on the side there actually. Games as well. We've got Dark Chambers, Mario Brothers, Impossible Mission, Tower Toppler, Centipede, Cracked. I actually happen to know the guy who programmed Tower Toppler and one of the guys who was involved in Dark Chambers, which is pretty cool. I'm just going to move that a minute, and you can have a look at the games, because it'll be easier to take it out of the box if I move it. There's not a lot in the box. There we go. There it is. I'll stick it there for a minute. I do actually have a user manual as well, although it's not in the most amazing condition. Yeah, it's got some tape and it's got this what looks like a little bit of mould, but maybe it was when I'm guessing something probably got splashed onto it by the same person who originally owned this and ripped it. You can tell it's a new manual because it mentions things like your normal channels being tuned into BBC One, BBC Two, ITV and Channel 4, back when we only had 4 channels, because it suggests that Channel 5 is a suitable choice. So that just, shows how far we've come, because obviously Channel 5 came in and then satellite TV came in and cable and stuff, and it was all over. So there we go. How to start the built-in game. That's one thing, one of the first things to mention about the PAL version of the Atari 7800. It looks different. I'll stick a picture of the NTSC version up in the top right hand corner. They do look very different because the NTSC model doesn't have this really distinctive rainbow plate on the front. It has a much smaller and subtler silver strip with smaller logos and stuff. The actual case is exactly the same. It's that strip that really is the defining difference between the NTSC systems and the PAL systems. Also, actually another difference to mention is that some of the very early NTSC systems, the original 1984 launch models, have an expansion port on the side, which none of the other models have. And that expansion port was, well, obviously to put there to expand it, but it never really got used for anything. So the Trammels thought that the expansion port was a needless expense, so took it out, and all the stuff that was going to use the expansion port was cancelled, most notably a Laserdisc add-on, which I talked about in one of my other videos. It's a very, very interesting story of Atari's ventures into the world of Laserdiscs. Now, let's have a look around the console. And also, yes, I mentioned a minute ago about the built-in games. So yeah, the PAL 7800 has Asteroids built into it. The NTSC model didn't have a game built into it. The NTSC model came with Pole Position on cartridge, whereas the PAL model did not come with a cartridge. It just came with Asteroids built into it. On the front of the unit, there we've got our two standard Atari joystick ports, and we've got our difficulty switches, which have obviously been carried over from the 2600 to help with the backwards compatibility, especially. On the sides there's absolutely nothing. Obviously on the front, we've got power, pause, select and reset. That was the big difference between what you had on the 2600 and what you've got on the 7800, because you have this pause button, which is great. People have even made mods actually, so they've moved that onto the controllers. But yeah, obviously you would have to go and overreach the console to do it, but it's still very cool having a pause button. On the back we have the annoying non-standard 7800 power socket. That was I say annoying because they were very easy to break. Where it went into there on the power supply. I can show you the end here actually on my one. I have an original power supply here, thankfully. In fact, I seem to remember that when I bought this 7800, the power supply with it was actually broken, which is why I got it so cheap, and I just bought another power supply. I think I bought this at Telegames, but I don't know if you can see that, it's not focusing very well on it. There we go. So they would break really, really, really easily, those little sockets. And it wasn't like you could just take a power supply from another system, because it's completely non-standard. So actually, you will find a lot of 7800s that don't have power supplies, that have broken power supplies on eBay. They're the ones to look out for, because it's generally a very reliable machine. So I never really hear of ones that don't work. So if you do see one that's like listed as not working, it's well worth picking one up and then trying to get a power supply. And as I say, I bought mine from Telegames. I'm pretty sure you can still get them from there. So the only other thing on the back is the RF socket. Sadly, there is no other kind of connection. Strangely, French models of the 7800, which are now highly sought after, have an RGB socket on the back, because SCART and RGB was more standard in France at the time. So the French SECAM models have RGB sockets on the back. I mean, you can mod the 7800 obviously to change the output, composite or whatever you like. But I'm not really a fan of modding systems. I've said in the past, I prefer to keep my systems original. So one day I perhaps would quite like to pick up a French model of the system. So let's have a look at the controllers. So there's the standard 7800 joypads. These came with the system, and they look like this. And they have these thumbsticks, which, as you will see, can be unscrewed. Voila. So if you don't want to use it with that in, you can just take it out and unscrew it. And you will find that a lot of the ones that you'll see on eBay and stuff will have the thumbsticks missing. Thankfully, mine, surprisingly, despite the box being a bit knackered and stuff, did come with 2 controllers, both with thumbsticks. So that was pretty pleasing, to be honest with you. But yeah, you'll find a lot of them have got those missing. So obviously they had 2 buttons, A and B, which is another difference from the 2600, because the 2600 was single button. And let's have a look at the American controller for comparison, because they didn't get a joypad, they got a joystick. They got the Pro Line controller, or what they often call the Pain Line controller, because they really, really hurt your hand to use. They're not very natural, you can see. You have to kind of hold them like this, which I think is pretty horrible. They look quite cool, but yeah, then they're not good to use at all. They have the 2 buttons in as well. And yes, the Americans are very jealous of us because we got a joypad. No doubt that was in response to the fact that the NES had joypads. So they thought, oh, we'll come up with our own joypad. And Master System obviously had joypads as well. So they came up with that instead for us Euros. And there was a light gun as well, which looks like this. You'll see that the light gun says XE system on it. There was meant to be an actual 7800 light gun, which I'll show in the top right hand corner so you can see the difference. It looks the same, but it's a different colour. It's orangey, kind of red colour. But they never bothered to release that properly, and what you had to do was just go and buy an XE system light gun, which is a bit stupid really, because I imagine a lot of 7800 owners didn't know that this was the gun they had to go and buy to use with the 7800, because it doesn't match. It's XE colours, as you can see, and it says XE system on it. It doesn't say 7800. So I always feel they shot themselves in the foot a little bit there by not having a specific 7800 light gun, especially as there's actually quite a lot of light gun games for the system. Really good stuff as well, like Crossbow and Alien Brigade in particular are 2 of my big favourites. Oh, Meltdown, another one I must mention actually. Three of my real favourite games on the system actually, and they're all light gun games. So let's go back a moment. Obviously, I mentioned a minute ago about obviously this being probably in response to the NES and Master System. So I want to cover the history of the 7800 a little bit for a moment. Now, a lot of people believe that the 7800 was shelved because Jack Tramiel wasn't interested in games, and it was just, you know, shelved and cancelled, and they only brought it back because the NES was doing so well. And that's been a long repeated myth. A lot of people seem to know that it's complete bullcrap now, but not as many people as you'd hope. A lot of people seem to still believe the stupid released in response to the NES story. It wasn't. From the moment Jack Tramiel took over Atari in 1984, his plan was always to release the 7800 and the 2600 Junior. That's backed up in a huge amount of interviews. And in fact, I recently interviewed Michael Katz, who was heading up Atari's console division. He was brought in. Michael Katz was previously at Epix and Coleco, so he already had a lot of experience in the games industry. He launched the ColecoVision, launched Coleco handhelds, launched actually the very first handhelds at Mattel, and he put Epix into the spotlight. So he was the right guy for Atari to bring in. And actually later on he joined Sega as president of Sega America and did the whole Sega does what Nintendo don't. That was all his idea. But he was at Atari and I interviewed him and he backed it up as well. I'd read it from other sources, but he said very much when he was brought into Atari, he was told straight away that he was being brought in to help launch, relaunch the 7800 and 2600 Junior. And he said it was always in their plans. The problem was that there was a legal dispute over this, which is what the bit that people seem to miss, because as I've mentioned earlier, the original launch of the 7800 took place in 1984 in California and New York only. They were the two test markets. It sold out and it got a brilliant reception. All the press thought it was a superb console, and they vastly preferred it to the NES, which was also getting test marketed at the same time. Although I don't think it was quite the NES then, I think it was the Nintendo Advanced Entertainment System or something like that. It had a slightly different name. And and what happened? So in 1984, as many people know, Atari was split into two as Warner Brothers decided they wanted to get out of the business. They hung on to the arcade division. The consumer division was sold to Trammell Technology, who then renamed the company Atari Corporation. But what they found out was that they didn't actually own the 7800. The 7800 was still owned. The rights to it were still owned by a company called General Computer Corporation, otherwise known as GCC, who had created the hardware for Atari. And GCC's story is well worth looking up, because they were actually the creators of Ms. Pac-Man. And it was them getting sued for making illegal mod kits of Atari arcade games like Missile Command that actually led them into working for Atari, creating arcade games, programming games for their home systems, and ultimately their coup de grace, the Atari 7800, their proudest creation. And they still own the rights, but Atari, or Jack Tramiel in particular, argued that he should not have to pay GCC for the rights to 7800 because Warner should have done that, because Warner had previously released the console. And to be fair, he had a point. He obviously thought that he was buying the company and all the IP, and it turned out he wasn't. And Warner argued it because they said it basically is your problem now. You own the company. If you want to sell this hardware, you need to pay the people who designed it. This rumbled on for a very long time. Eventually, in late 1985, it was settled. The lawsuit was settled. Atari did end up paying GCC for the hardware because they wanted to get it out. But the problem then they found was that it had very, very few games ready for it, because the original 1984 lineup only consisted of a handful of titles, including stuff like Joust, Dig Dug, and Ms. Pac-Man. So they needed more games. That was a big problem, because by that point Nintendo were already tying up the market, and it was a problem getting people to develop games for 7800. Michael Katz managed to go down an interesting route of getting computer companies on board, people like Broderbund and US Gold and Epix and Cosmicorp, all the big, well-known PC games companies of the time, and he licensed games from them instead of Coinops. So we ended up getting stuff, like Karateka, Super Huey, Impossible Mission, Summer Games, Winter Games, a lot of stuff like that instead. And it was clever, because he managed to find a way of bypassing Nintendo's lockout policies, and he managed to get some better titles for the 7800, finished off a few of the ones that were already in development. He actually cancelled a ton as well that were meant to come out. A lot of people wonder what happened to some of the games that were originally announced for the Atari 7800, like Moon Patrol and Tempest and Elevator Action, Track and Field. There were quite a few games like that. Millipede was another one that were announced early on as being going to be launch games, and never, ever, ever appeared. And I can confirm that Michael Katz told me that those titles were all binned because he felt that they were either the licensing fees weren't worth it, I'd imagine that's stuff like track and field for an old game. He didn't feel like it was worth paying the licensing fees for such old games because they were quite high licensing fees as well, and they were trying to do the system on a budget. And other games got cancelled because he just thought they were old hat and people wouldn't really be interested in them. So they trimmed the lineup slightly. So, for example, with Millipede, that was cancelled because they also had Centipede, and he thought they didn't need both. And Centipede was a more well-known game, so they stuck with Centipede, cancelled Millipede. Moon Patrol, he felt that no one would be interested in Moon Patrol anymore. That got cancelled. So there's a few titles like that. It's same with Tempest, believe it or not. He thought that that would be a game that was too old, that people wouldn't really be interested in, so that got cancelled as well. He said that some of the quality of those games was also questionable as well, he told me. So there we go. That settled some of that. So once the 7800 got going, another problem was that they didn't have many third-party publishers. So Atari were obviously trying to license and release everything themselves. They did later on get a few people on board. For example, you can see here at the back Double Dragon by Absolute Entertainment and Activision. Absolute basically coded it for Activision. So they kind of combined on quite a few titles, but both of those companies released their own third-party games, both Activision and Absolute Entertainment. There's another company called Froggo who released some third-party stuff, and there was quite a few games actually, where Atari kind of had a co-publishing agreement, so to speak. So, for example, there's some games by US Gold, like Tower Toppler and Jinx, for example, where Atari published them in cooperation with US Gold. I assume that was to save US Gold's costs and stuff. Atari build the cartridges, market them and stuff. But their name still prominently appeared on the boxes. And one cool thing that Atari did do, which I had to put in the video, was, as you can see there, Donkey Kong Jr., and there's also Mario Brothers, which gets in Nintendo games, because Atari still held the licenses for Donkey Kong Jr. and Mario Brothers from earlier on, when they'd released those games for the Atari 8-bit computers. So, yes, and actually they released Mario Brothers for the 2600 as well. So that was much to the annoyance of Nintendo that Atari still had those home rights and they couldn't do anything about it. So they had 3 games from the NES launch lineup also came out for the 7800, Nintendo badged games, and they made a point of putting Nintendo on the boxes as well, just to annoy them even more, which I always think is great. So the PAL 7800 came out in 1987. Originally, it wasn't meant to come out in Europe at all. They originally were just going to do the XE game system. But there was actually a very famous article in CMVG where they kind of begged Atari to release the 7800 in this country because they were so impressed with it after seeing it in America. And Atari changed their minds and decided to launch the 7800 in Europe. Good for us. So that's how the PAL model came about. And it actually had a slightly longer life in PAL land as well, because there was a couple of games that were released only in Europe. Sentinel springs to mind. Never got an NTSC release. So that was one of the very, very, very last games released for the 7800. So yeah, it had a slightly longer lifetime in Europe. And there's also a lot of questions about how well the 7800 sold. A lot of people know that it did particularly well in America, believe it or not. It sold around 3.8 million units in North America, which might not sound a lot, but when you compare the fact that the Master System only sold, well, just under 2 million units in North America, that's pretty damn good. It basically sold pretty much twice as many units as the Master System did in North America. Obviously, that pales in comparison to what the NES sold, but it's still pretty cool that you know, the Atari 7800 finished in second place in North America. In Europe, it had a lot more competition because we were very much into home computers at that time. And the Master System obviously did very well in Europe and the UK especially. Sales of the 7800 aren't well known. What I can tell you is that in 1990, which is pretty much the heyday of the 7800, I suppose it's 89 into 90, Atari still held over 50% of the UK console market, which was actually reported in Ray's magazine at that time. And that was down to sales of the 2600 Junior and the 7800. So I think from that, first of all, we can assume that it was selling pretty well. But I was also told by Atari UK marketing manager Daryl Still that the 7800 was sold very well through the catalogues of the time. So I mean, it was sold in a lot of the home catalogues you used to get, your mum used to have, and it was sold in places like Toys R Us. Argos sold it as well, another catalogue shop, the high street catalogue shop. So yeah, I would imagine it got a lot of sales through Argos and Toys R Us especially as well. I remember seeing them in Toys R Us when I was buying 2600 games from there. I had one quite local to me. It's believed, it's not confirmed, but that sales for the 7800 in the UK were around 500,000 units. I've had that figure suggested by several people, that they believe it was around 500,000 units. The NES is supposed to have sold between 600,000 and 1 million units, depending on which story you believe. There seems to be a lot of conflicting figures again out there for NES sales. So it probably sounds realistic, because the NES never did big guns in this country. But the 7800 was actually probably sold in more stores, because for a long time the only place you could buy an NES was from Boots the Chemist, whereas the 7800 was sold in a lot more places. Calculus was another chain where you could get 7800 stuff, and Software Plus. So they were two computer shop chains that sold the games and the systems that I remember as well. So let's actually have a look at one of the game boxes for a minute. I think it would be right to show one of these. So let's grab Donkey Kong Jr. So you'll have this distinctive silver design. Obviously, apart from the third-party stuff, they have their own boxes, which I really like. I think they look really, really smart on the shelf. A lot of them have really nice, bright artwork that stands out. I love the sides when they look on the shelf, because they're all uniform. They've all got that red writing with the Atari logo at the bottom. So they've all got that uniform design, which I absolutely love. And the back always has the descriptions like that. What's in the game, whether it uses the light gun or not, will be shown on the back as well. A couple of screenshots. They're really smart. And the same as the 2600 boxes as well. So you can stack them in a line with them, which is good. And the cartridges look something like this. They have P's on the back if they're PAL. It's easy to tell a PAL cartridge. You can't tell from the box though, which annoys a lot of people. So you see a lot of sealed games still around for 7800, but you can't actually tell if they're PAL or not by opening the box. Weirdly, some of the games have colour labels, like you can see here, but some of the games have black and white labels, which is weird. So they're obviously trying to save money in a way by making black and white labels, but they still kept some of them colour. Not really sure why some of them kept colour. Maybe the bigger name titles. The booklets were always like this, in this red print, like the 2600 ones were at the time. All of the instruction books are really brief. I mean, they're literally like pamphlets. They don't go into the detail that they did in sort of the earlier 2600 games. Oh, I just noticed actually that manual I just showed you is German. This one has got a German manual and a English manual in it. I've never noticed that before. So there we go. That's the game boxes. So really, that's all there is to show you with the 7800. That's it. That's the whole story. There is a pretty healthy homebrew scene these days, the 7800, which is definitely worth mentioning. So there's new games coming out all the time. I've got quite a few homebrews actually, stuff like Pac-Man Collection, Berserk and Frenzy. There is a brilliant version of Burger Time called Beef Drop. They're some of my favourites. There's been some stuff that really pushes the system, like there's a game called Bentley Bear's Crystal Quest, starring Bentley Bear from Crystal Castles fame, which is basically started off as someone doing a Wonder Boy port, and it evolved into Bentley Bears Crystal Quest, and that's a seriously impressive platform game for the system. And it's a shame, we didn't get some titles like that back in the day, because it really shows what 7800 could do. Other notable mentions, I've shown clips through this video of some of the best games available for the 7800. But Midnight Mutants is a game that really shows what the system is capable of. And Ninja Golf, of course, the 7800's killer app. Everybody knows about Ninja Golf. It's an absolutely brilliant game. So it's a 7800 worth owning today, most definitely. I don't think there's any question there. If you are a collector and you like your retro consoles, then you should own a 7800. If you don't, there is something wrong with you. Let's face it, this system plays all 2600 games, so you don't even need a 2600, you just need one of these. Straight away, it's a no-brainer, because you can play all your old 2600 games on the 7800, plus all of the great 7800 games that are out there, and 7800 homebrews. There's some really good exclusives for the 7800. I've already mentioned Ninja Golf and Midnight Mutants. There's some other stuff like Scrapyard Dog, which is a great Super Mario Brothers style game. Scrapyard Dog was on the Lynx as well, but there's Lynx in the 7800 version, so actually quite different. So there are some good exclusives out there to make the system worth owning as well. Some really good arcade ports, especially the older games like Joust and Ms. Pac-Man. You've got a brilliant version of Commando, Akari Warriors, Ball Blazer. The best version of Ball Blazer is on the 7800. So there's a lot of good stuff out there. They have snuck up a bit in price in recent years, the systems, but they're still not mega expensive to buy, and the games, most of the games are fairly affordable. There are a few rarities, stuff like, especially third-party stuff, like Water Ski and Tank Command go for quite a big price, and some of the stuff like Double Dragon and Rampage can fetch higher prices as well, especially like the PAL version of Double Dragon. My one there, actually, it's an Australian Home Entertainment Supplies HES version. That's the only one I could find. I couldn't find a proper PAL Activision one. But again, some of that stuff can reach high prices, but a lot of the main titles you can pick up pretty cheaply, and you can even still find quite a lot of sealed games going around as well. So yes, for me, the 7800 is a must-own system that everybody should have in their collection if they are a retro games collector. I thank you for watching my Atari 7800 hardware review. If you like my videos, please subscribe if you haven't. Please check out my Patreon if you want to get access to lots of exclusive content. And I'll see you all again for another video very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.